During web application development, we create solutions that address the customer's needs and solve problems of business and users. To achieve this, different architecture patterns and technologies are used. For many years, application designs have revolved around the MVC architecture pattern, which is Model, View, Controller pattern. In the meantime, there have been a series of advanced frameworks like FLUX and REDUX, which helps you deal with complex applications. We are aware of the increased complexity in the apps that multiplies due to absence of effective design patterns in the place. Here we have compared MVC and FLUX versus the REDUX to help you create effective, sensible and scalable application architecture. Here we have compared MVC, FLUX and REDUX to help you create effective, sensible and scalable application architecture. From the architecture perspective, MVC is a well-known architecture pattern which is a three-layer development structure. That is, we name it as three-tier architecture, where it divides the applications into three phases, which is controller, view, model. Model maintains the data and behavior of the application. View displays the model in the UI, whereas controller serves as an interface between the view and model. So whenever a controller receives the request from the user, it uses appropriate model and view and generates the response, sending back to the UI, and hence the user can have the view displayed in the browser. So this is a three-tier architecture of MVC. After learning a few highlights and the instability and complexity of the MVC architecture, the Facebook development team made some important changes in the system and released the FLUX as an alternative to MVC architecture. By the Facebook team. The FLUX architecture is based on the store, dispatcher, actions and the view. The store or stores serves as a container for holding the application state and the logic. Dispatcher coordinates actions and update to the stores. Actions enables data passing to the dispatcher. View, same as in the MVC pattern, but in the context of React components. So this is all the UI. In terms, it deals with the multiple components. So in FLUX architecture, when a user clicks something, the view creates the action. Action can create new data and send it to the dispatcher. The dispatcher then dispatches the action result to the appropriate store. The store then updates the state on the result and sends the update to the view. However, they still felt that this architecture of the flux could be more simpler. Consequently, they developed the same team, FB team, developed a similar architecture from the flux, removing the unnecessary complexities. They developed the REDUX library. So REDUX is a library which implements the idea of a flux but in a different way. It introduces a new components like reducers and the central store. So this reducer logic that decides how your data exists in the pure function. This centralized store holds the state of the object that denotes the state of the entire app. In Redux architecture, the application event is denoted as an action when it is dispatched to the reducer, the pure function. The reducer updates the centralized store with the new data based on the action it receives. Then the store creates a new state and sends the update to the view. Store creates a new state and sends the update to the view. At that time, the view is recorrected and which re-renders to update the UI with the latest update. So this is the three major differences from the architecture perspective. So based on their need and the business requirement, the users or the developers go and choose the architecture. The recommended architecture with simpler and less complexity in React would be Redux architecture. Few more differences to take a look from the Flux architecture, Redux architecture. We have few more differences to compare between MVC, Flux and the REDUX are from the data flow direction. MVC is implemented which enforces bidirectional data flow, which it differs from unidirectional data flow of Redux and Flux. In MVC, there is no single direction in the application that data flows in. Here, different part of the system possesses that authority to the stage, as well as decentralized throughout the application. So Flux and Redux do not encourage bidirectional flow to ensure clean data flow architecture. The significant benefit of the unidirectional approach is that since the data flows through your application in single direction, you can have a better control over it. So the control of data is handled in Redux and Flux. When coming to concept of stores, Flux uses stores to catch any application associated with data or state, whereas MVC model attempts to model a single object. So MVC do not have the concept of store, where Flux includes multiple stores. But Redux is enforcing a single global store. You wonder why? Consider your action uses multiple stores. So there is a scope of forgetting to handle which action in certain stores. So this causes an issue in the application management. Also, it is hard to obtain and outline what state it includes. So all changes in Redux are made through a pure function called reducers. So these reducers decide and update to the single centralized global store. Next, coming to the point where all the business logic resides in each architecture. In every computer application, the domain logic or a business logic is the part of program which translates real-time business rules into how data can be created, stored, displayed as well as changed. In MVC, the controller takes the responsibility of handling both the data and the state of the application. In the MVC, the controller takes the responsibility of handling both data and state of the application. In FLUX, the logic of changes in the data is based upon the actions and it's mentioned in its appropriate store. But in Redux, where we already know reducer is the very important here, where it decides which receives the previous state and one action then returns the new state. So the logic remains with the reducer here, which handles all the logic and update is given to one single centralized store. Now coming to the point of debugging perspective, debugging is difficult in MVC due to bidirectional flow, whereas in FLUX it is similar and simple with the use of dispatcher. In Redux, we do not have the concept of dispatcher. Instead, the single store, that is the centralized hub store, makes the debugging much more easier. In Redux, it is lot more easier to manage data and debug because the state of your entire application is maintained within this global store. Now, where this can be used is MVC is popular in both client-side and server-side frameworks, whereas FLUX, it supports only client-side framework and the Redux does the same. Because in MVC, there is no shortage of front-end frameworks which can support you to connect with MVC and AngularJS or Ember or Backbone. So the MVC also shines on the backend frameworks or solutions like Spring, .NET, Ruby, Rails, etc. But Redux, FLUX are largely used only for the front-end patterns only. So whereas the concept of FLUX in Redux is specifically used in Angular or React like front-end frameworks that is specific to UI frameworks, whereas MVC you have heard about using this pattern in .NET, designing your model and controller and generating it to your view. So overall, these powerful design patterns make your app's UI attractive and usable. But one highlighting point here is Redux is not just a state management library, it offers several benefits for your front-end applications, ensuring data consistency, sharing data between. One important note here could be Redux is not just a state management library. It offers several benefits for your front-end applications, including ensuring data consistency, sharing data between components, and providing templates for code organization. Being Redux and FLUX is primarily associated with React, but it can work well with other libraries and specific to the front-end pattern. Hence, considering all these comparisons between MVC, FLUX and Redux, a developer think what suits best for your project. It completely depends on the technology you adopt, that aim of your application, as well as to make your application UI attractive and usable.